Please don't scroll. There's something I want to say, and I'm posting this. It's different from my last video, but it is another deep one concerning my family versus Selwood housing. And I'm posting this for the first time on TikTok. And if it's the first time you're seeing this, please bear with me. I have ADHD autism, and I'm gonna fumble what I'm about to say. This is from a letter, an email letter to the housing ombudsman about our complaint about Selwood housing, and I'll probably fumble a bit, so I'm going to try and keep this as unedited as I possibly can. So here we go. My name is Benjamin Lee. I represent my uncles Martin and Ian Dutch, who until the end of March of this year resided at 14 Cedar Grove in Trowbridge, that's in Wiltshire. This is my third letter to you regarding the conduct of Selwood housing against my uncles. Excuse me. Oh yeah, I'm full of antihistamines, and it's fucking hot out there already, and it's just turned midday, and it's gonna get hotter. It's already 28 degrees, and I'm sweating my tits off. So I'm going to attempt to bring you up to speed on this whole affair as coherent an order in my capacity with a recent update. My nan, Doreen Dutch, and the mother of Martin and Ian lived at this property until she passed away, aged 91, on December 21st, 2023. Martin had been back at the residence since 2017, and Ian some around 2021. I want to mention at this point that we knew Martin apparently didn't have the right of succession due to that right passing to Doreen after my granddad Francis Dutch passed away in July 2006. But I was informed by Martin and Ian that no tenancy book had been forwarded to Doreen, and Francis was still receiving council tax bills for years after his death. The council was aware of this. The only tenancy book we found was from 1964, when the family moved in. There were no records of Selwood's book on rules or regulations either when we informed Selwood of this too. So January 4th, 2024 was the first meeting with Selwood where they would talk about discretionary succession. The representative was Emma Andrews. Attending were Martin, his sister, my mother Susan. Mrs. Andrews had requested Martin bring his birth certificate for scanning, but the certificate was damaged after Mrs. Andrews spilt a drink upon it. When she did scan the certificate, she later said it had been misplaced. Martin had expressed his wish to buy the property due to the family living there for 60 years and the amount of work that was needed. Martin had been living there long enough to have been called a permanent resident. He was the last of Doreen's 6 children to be registered at the property from his birth in 1970. Mrs. Andrews did offer a form of succession, a way in which Martin and Ian could remain at the property, but the language she used gave the belief that they would have to leave. 16th of January 2024 was the second meeting, Ian joining Martin, Susan and Emma Andrews. Martin and Ian provided receipts of proof of address going back to when both moved in. Both expressed their circumstances for moving back to the family home and remaining. Excuse me. Martin had also brought back his birth certificate, but no copies were taken. We later learned from an email from a Paul Spiggs, more on that later, that they had only provided some basic information. February 8th, 2024. Susan received a phone call from a lady called Paula. She didn't catch her surname. Whom I understand to be a financial manager regarding rent arrears totaling 790 quid. No paperwork, contact, or the subject brought up at the previous meetings had been forwarded to Susan, Martin, or Ian since Selwood was told of Doreen's passing. Doreen's bank account had been frozen as her estate had gone to probate. Mrs. Andrews knew this too. Susan was the only contact at that point since Martin and Ian worked long hours. It was late in the day when this phone call commenced and too late for them to sort out, so it was left for Susan to pay the arrears, including 2 extra weeks, totaling 8 weeks of rent until they could set up a temporary form of rent payment. Selwood offered no explanation for this. A temporary rent account should have been set up weeks prior. Was it Selwood's intention to stay quiet about the arrears until Martin and Ian had to leave, and in turn owing thousands, which would make them look like bad tenants if/when offered a new tenancy? It was from this call that we found out someone delivered a letter that we didn't receive. More on that below. And she further mentioned the date of the next meeting, February 14th. Martin and Ian had to take time off in short notice to attend. It was after this conversation with Paula that Sue wrote a complaint to Selwood with some details listed above. She also wrote in this complaint that she had emailed a Jason Humphreys, assuming he was the point of contact, regarding my niece and Susan's granddaughter Mia moving into the property, but there was no response. She sent a second email, which was responded to. Mr. Humphreys informed Susan that she would have to contact Mrs. Andrews about this information, for which Susan already had beforehand. Mia was moving down from the Shetland Islands on February 8th to look for work and apprenticeships and for help with her transition, as she has just come out as transgender. Susan was at Southampton Airport with myself to pick Mia up when she received Paula's phone call. Mia will stay at Doreen's due to Doreen's health issues, having her staying downstairs permanently and leaving her bedroom vacant. She was being cared for by Susan and Sister Carol in the daytime, while Martin took over evening duties. Mia was scheduled to visit for Christmas. Unfortunately, that was the day that Doreen died. The third meeting, February 14th, with Ian, Martin, Susan, and Emma Andrews present. Ian forwarded his birth certificate. That was the extent of the documentation passed, as they were not informed what was needed. Paula called after the third meeting, wanting to know if the temporary bank account for rent had been set up. She and Susan had a short conversation about what happened, and Paula agreed with Susan that what Mrs. Andrews and her associates had done was wrong. Susan then received a call from Mrs. Adams informing her that Ian and Martin needed to provide bank statements by the end of the week, February 23rd. So a mad dash had to be undertaken on that day to get the statements and handed in to Selwood. A stage 1 complaint acknowledgement letter arrived February 15th, dated February 12th, from an Alex Clark, senior customer complaint specialist. The complaint has been logged, and will be investigated by a Mark Robbins. They'll be in touch in the next 10 days. Letters arrived from a Heather Fox on February 22nd. She wrote to inform that operatives have appointments at the property on March 18th, 28th, and May 30th between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. when Martin and Ian are at work. Again, Selwood knew their work hours, and it would mean taking more time off work to deal with. Plus, it had given an indication that Martin and Ian would still be there regardless. No date for moving out provided. Around this time, someone working in Selwood's financial department, I believe her name was Rebecca, had noticed that Ian had transferred some funds from his current account from a savings account. Ian told us that it's because he didn't want to go overdrawn. Fair enough. Excuse me. She then demanded information on the savings account, and every other piece of financial information that Selwood didn't need. Excuse me. All they needed was if Martin and Ian were capable of making rent, and they told her that they could. We believe that Selwood was looking for leverage, something to get the boys out of the property. February 26th, an email from a Paul Spiggs. I'll put some footnotes here for that. He explained that Martin and Ian would be allowed to stay under the use and occupation agreement, allowing any remaining people to request a discretionary succession. But the agreement couldn't be set up correctly due to an oversight on Selwood's part. So there was a chance to stay after all. The email fails to mention anything about Doreen's estate being frozen due to going to probate as the reason for the rent not being paid for 6 weeks, or Susan paying the arrears plus 2 weeks. According to Mr. Spiggs, the rent arrears issue had been rectified. No justification for complaint. I have to emphasize this. We wouldn't have known about this if this Paula hadn't called. The arrears would have continued without our knowledge, but from their side, no harm, no foul. The email continues with confirmation of the first 2 meetings. The first providing 4-week notice to terminate the tenancy and eligibility for discretionary succession given the absence of a legal right to succeed. The second, explaining personal circumstances and the wish to remain. The claim couldn't proceed because Martin and Ian had provided some basic information. They needed to provide personal identification and evidence income. Mrs. Andrews confirmed they would be liable for use and occupation whilst assessing their claim. February 6th, another member of Selwood's team, here's the letter part. February 6th, another member of the Selwood team hand-delivered a use and occupation letter to the property with an invitation to a meeting on February 14th and the details of what to bring. The letter outlined the payment procedure. Am I right in thinking that this was a good indication that Martin had the right to buy was being considered. What's missing here is if the letter changed hands, or if anyone was home to accept the letter at all. Martin and Ian couldn't receive it since they're factory workers and they work before and after Selwood's business hours. If a courier had come to the house, why didn't they slip it through the letterbox? Or better still, send an email. They should have given it to Susan. He continues into the 14th of February meeting while Martin and Ian brought some documents. Bank statements were not provided. They were advised to provide bank statements by the 21st of February, as the meeting had been scheduled for the 22nd of February to evaluate your discretionary succession application. But since the letter didn't come, how the hell could they know? Excuse me. He concludes that the complaint could not be upheld, claiming contact between the parties were regular in order to assess their claim, but not mentioning Martin and Ian had actually very limited to no windows in which to acquire certain documents. They were placed in very difficult situations, apart from mourning the sudden loss of their mother. They were forced to take time off work that they couldn't afford to appease Selwood. A correct course of action was to email details of information required to Susan, giving Martin and Ian time to receive all the particulars and then set a date for a meeting where everything could have been hashed out. According to Mr. Spiggs, succession was already on the tenancy. They didn't have the legal right to continue living there. Alternative accommodation would be discretionary, subject to the necessary documentation. And then this caught my eye. Please note that discretionary succession can only be considered for family members who were permanent residents in the house at the time of death. Unfortunately, individuals who had moved in recently cannot be considered for discretionary succession. As I have said, Martin moved back in 2017. He'd been living there permanently and had been registered on the electoral roll at the time of the 2019 election. Not to mention in receipt of particular letters, such as the HMRC, details from pensions as proof of this. Ian moved back in 2021, at least 2.5 years before Nan passed. Neither resemble visiting capacities. He ends with, "This now concludes stage 1 of our complaint process." Sorry, this is a bit long, but there you go. A lot to cover. One day prior to receiving this email, I was sent my first ombudsman email. Regardless of the correct procedure, I didn't care at that point because I was disgusted by the recent events. Martin received an authority consent request letter asking if he accepts me as his representative, which he did. From the tone of Mr. Spiggs' email, it comes across as Martin and Ian dragging their feet, but he's not taken into account their work hours. They work long hours in this post-COVID world. If Selwood had liaised with Susan, this could have all been sorted sooner and so much time would have been saved. At the time of writing, this was the family home at stake. Unsatisfied with this response, Susan launched another complaint, and on the 27th of February last year, A letter arrived from a Zoe Ridley. Excuse you. The customer complaints specialist. She wrote to confirm the complaint had been logged and would be investigated by Emma Andrews. Emma Andrews, the very person we complained about, is now the caseworker for this complaint. How is that fair? How is that fair? When I heard this, I immediately started work on another letter to the Housing Ombudsman. I sent that March 2nd, 2024. During the original meetings and when the conversation came up on Martin taking the property over, Mrs. Andrews checked and she said it's not on the list to go up for sale. And we were left with the understanding that it would not go up for sale. This is before someone came around to survey the house. Martin had the capacity to free funds from a pension in January to take care of a deposit and start work on the vast repairs. We told them how in desperate need the property was to repair. Susan had a strong belief that Selwood would not have the money for repairs and that they would put it up for auction. I don't know the date, but when the surveyor did arrive, they came 2 hours early and didn't tell Susan of this. Thankfully, Martin was home to take them through the details. The surveyor seemed to believe that a lot of the damage could be fixed by Selwood. The house hasn't had anything done to it since the 1990s. Mold in the kitchen, in the cupboards, so deep that a touch-up was impossible. Selwood has said in recent letters that they are going to leave the kitchen until this year. They also say that the bathroom, also covered in mold, will not have any work done for it for the next 10 years. Windows, doors need replacing, the radiators are in the wrong place, the ceilings are subsiding, there's asbestos in front of the windowsills in the living room and they are exposed. The outhouse has a hole in it. I'm going to put a picture up for this. From a job that was never finished back in the 1990s. The house needs a major overhaul. We think it will cost at least 50 grand to put everything right. But Selwood were adamant that they were going to fix it, but hadn't taken into any consideration the amount of work it was going to take. We believe the damp was so bad, whatever it takes, it would go back to the outer brickwork. What could Selwood do for Martin and Ian? Selwood saw Martin had the capital. Let me say that again. Selwood saw the capital Martin had and refused him the right to buy, and wouldn't offer an accommodation for him on his own or 2-bed with Ian because he had too much money, and we heard this a number of times. Ian was offered a one-time deal in a flat in a region he had previously lived, but due to its bad reputation and the fact that it was a first floor flat, he declined. Ian has knee issues, and both Martin and Ian have rheumatoid arthritis. Plus Ian has a cat. It would be in the best interest to get a 2 or 3 bed in a, I'll say that again. It was in their best interests to get a 2 or 3 bed since the town is expensive for one person. In the following months, communication between Selwood and us dwindled. The second complaint, handled by Jason Humphreys, went nowhere. All we wanted was a fair hearing, but Selwood claimed we were the ones not cooperating. Martin and Ian were told to leave the property by March 28th of this year, 2025, or face court action. They struggled to find a new place to live. This after Selwood told them that they wouldn't leave them homeless, but had no choice to grab somewhere close by. Unfortunately, this private property is in a poor state as well, and they have to stick to their contract until February 2026. So, June 11th, 2025, Selwood put the house up on Zoopla through Strakers for public auction for 135,000 quid. They told us several times they wouldn't do this. They said they would pay to do it up and rent it out. But no work has been done except the roof. This whole affair has been, well, how do I put it? It's been distressing. It sounds like an episode of He Said, She Said. Whose word can be believed? But this is our family home. We were the first family to move in 1964. All Francis and Doreen's 6 children grew up there, including Martin and Ian, of course. We had asked Selwood to forward papers for taking over the property before Christmas, and we were told the papers would arrive after New Year. But we didn't expect Nan to pass away. Doreen was 91 and frail, and was doing fine until December 21st, 2023. The conduct of Selwood has been unprofessional, dismissive, and disrespectful. I don't know what I'm asking from your department, since the home is now gone. I just wanted you to know everything, because it feels like we've always had limited rights, and we deserve the right to voice our side. I look forward to your response. And there my letter ends. My mother emailed Emma Andrews again and got a response on Friday or Saturday. It was recent. It was in the past 3 days. They must take us for idiots. She didn't exactly answer the questions that was forwarded to her. Mrs. Andrews still believes that Martin had no right to buy, and yet it still went the way it did. This whole situation has been, well, I just said. And to members of Selwood who could be watching this, and if you have an issue with me, or I'm being libelous to you or about you, I am not going anywhere. To Emma Andrews, Jason Humphreys, put yourself in our positions for once. Shame on you. Shame on you. It's no wonder that you have a 2.9 out of 5 rating. Shame on you. We were willing to work with you. That's all I got to say about this, and my throat is hurting. I think I've blabbered enough, so I'm going to hopefully say this is the last one, even though I got another one to talk about. I do have some better things to be getting on with. I just wanted this to be part of record. But if you made it this far, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to go now. Thanks for listening.